You are watching the National News Desk, America's News Now.
We're going to take the handcuffs off ICE. ICE knows who they're looking for. They just haven't been able to go arrest them.
Mass deportations in the making. What President-elect Trump says about reports that he is planning on using the military to secure the southern border. Then contaminated carrots, what we know about the latest E. coli threat identified by the FDA. And heart health, new revelations about the perils of a sedentary lifestyle and why not even a good workout can undo the damage from sitting. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. We are now 63 days away from President Donald Trump's second term as president of the United States. And we are getting a look at what could be one of his first items of business back in the White House. On his Truth Social page today, Donald Trump confirmed reports that he is prepared to declare a national emergency at the southern border and will use the United States military to enact his mass deportation program. Today, borders are to be. Tom Homan told Fox News he is headed to Mar-a-Lago this week to finalize the plans with a known target of where to start.
We know right now, looking at the data from the Trump administration, the Biden administration, the removal of criminal aliens has decreased 74%. So we have plenty of targets out there to arrest. ICE knows who they are. So, yeah, we're going to take handcuffs out of ICE. We're going to do the job, secure the country, protect the American communities, and arrest the bad guys first.
And turning now to the latest in the murder trial that has been a national lightning rod over crime and illegal immigration. We're following day 2 in the case of an undocumented migrant, Jose Ibarra, accused of killing Georgia student Laken Riley. Prosecutors say Ibarra planned to hurt Riley after encountering her during her morning jog back in February. Ibarra has pleaded not guilty. Today in court, police officers testified about their first encounter with Ibarra and what they believed looked like fresh scratches on his arms.
While speaking to him, I noticed on his right arm, his bicep, there was a scratch, which I identified as a potential defensive wound. On his left arm, he had a forearm scratch that was very similar, which in my mind looked like fingernail scratches to me.
Prosecutors suggest it shows a struggle between Riley and the suspect, but the defense may have another explanation when they address the judge. Ibarra has waived his right to a jury trial, which means it will be left up to the judge to issue a verdict in this case. And tonight we are following a line of severe storms from Houston to Topeka, moving right across the United States. These systems are bringing much needed rain to the Midwest and the Central Plains, but also in parts of Texas and Louisiana, a threat of tornadoes and flooding. At least one tornado has already been confirmed, touching down in southwestern Oklahoma earlier today. And nearly 2 months after Hurricane Helene, a boil advisory in Asheville, North Carolina has been lifted, a silver lining for the thousands of residents living under the threat of a contaminated water supply. It comes as the Biden administration requests that Congress quickly pass a massive $100 million disaster relief spending bill to respond to communities in the Southeast still cleaning up from major back-to-back Helene and Milton hurricanes. This as we learn more about the extent of the damage to a major Tennessee hospital that was severely damaged during Helene. Crews rescued dozens of people from the Unicoi County Hospital roof, with massive flooding happening on the inside of the building. Today, officials say nearly every piece of equipment inside is ruined, but say the structure itself is still intact.
The concrete slab and the steel columns are in decent shape, but we've not been able to get all the way back to those yet. That's part of what we're working through now.
President-elect Donald Trump's choice to lead the Federal Communications Commission is garnering both praise and criticism for his stated goals. Brendan Carr says he wants to deregulate much of the broadcast industry, but at the same time, more heavily regulate major technology companies. Christine Frizzell reports.
A top priority for the Federal Communications Commission under the future Trump administration will be, quote, reining in big tech. The man tapped to lead the agency, current FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, recently posting on X, "We must dismantle the censorship cartel and restore free speech rights for everyday Americans." Despite a more hands-off approach recently by companies like Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, Republicans have long insisted big tech censors conservative voices, blocking or suppressing content related to Hunter Biden's laptop or COVID-19 vaccine policies, which some government officials worried would lead to more transmission of or death from the virus.
As a conservative, I do think that there is a role for the government to play with respect to content moderation.
In other realms, Carr has promoted deregulation, with industry leaders celebrating his appointment as a boon for business, and recently accused NBC of violating the equal time rule when Kamala Harris appeared on Saturday Night Live just before the election.
And I'm just here to remind you, you got this.
In response, the network gave Trump TV time following a NASCAR race.
Just remember, Kamala and her friends broke it. I'll fix it.
Critics worry Trump's disdain for traditional TV networks could make them a target over the next 4 years.
They're a news organization. They have to be licensed to do it. They ought to take away their license for the way they did that.
Some insisting the FCC has limited power when it comes to big tech.
The FCC shouldn't be in the content regulating business. They're in charge of handing out broadcast licenses. They're in charge of making sure consumers don't get ripped off by their cable television or their phone company.
Now, while President-elect Trump has pivoted on his support of banning TikTok in the United States, Commissioner Carr appears to be in favor of it. As the author of the FCC section of Project 2025, he details the national security threat it and Chinese telecom as a whole pose to the country. Amira?
Christine, we now know Republicans will have control of the Senate and the House. Is it possible they pass legislation to grant more power to the FCC?
You know, that is a possibility. Congress could expand the agency's power and its authority. But if they pass new legislation, that means the next time an opposing party is in charge, in this case, a Democrat, the FCC would still possess that power. So it's likely they'll at least think twice about any major changes.
All right, really interesting developments here, though. Christine Frizzau reporting for us out of Washington, D.C. Thank you. And looking ahead, a House Ethics Committee meeting has been scheduled for Wednesday. The possibility is there of a vote on whether to release the committee's findings into an alleged improper relationship between former Congressman Matt Gaetz and an underage female. Gaetz is Donald Trump's nominee to lead the Justice Department. Speaker Mike Johnson said the report should remain confidential because Gaetz is no longer a member of Congress. But even if the committee does not act, House rules allow for any member to set up a full vote for the committee to release the report within 2 legislative days. And tonight, the CDC is investigating a major carrot contamination. We're talking about E. coli, an outbreak linked to tainted carrots that has led to at least 1 death and dozens of people getting sick across 18 different states so far. Grimaway Farms has now recalled its bagged organic baby and whole carrots sold under a number of brand names, including 365, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Wegmans, and Sprouts. The baby organic carrots had a best if used by date ranging from September 11th to November 12th. And tonight, it is now the defense's turn to make their case in the trial of Daniel Penny, a former Marine accused of killing a mentally ill man on the New York City subway. Penny, who used a chokehold to restrain Neely, who appeared to act erratically, is accused of using excessive lethal force. A medical examiner recently concluded a chokehold was the cause of Neely's death, but the defense is now expected to shift the focus of the case to Neely, who had prior arrests, a history of mental illness and drugs in his system, making the case that Penny was looking to protect others on the subway that day. And Spirit Airlines, it has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, meaning it will now undergo major financial restructuring. The company has been largely unable to recover from the drop in travel at the height of the pandemic. Spirit lost more than $2.5 billion since the start of 2020. The biggest U.S. budget airline also struggled after a failed attempt to merge with JetBlue. As for what this means for you as a traveler, Spirit officials say the airline will continue to operate as normal and all tickets will remain valid. And breaking news right now out of Lebanon, Reuters reporting both Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a U.S. proposal for a ceasefire with Israel. White House envoy Amos Hochstein is headed to Beirut right now to finalize that deal. This, however, does not impact the ongoing war in Gaza. So this is a separate ceasefire proposal from what is being negotiated between mediators, the U.S., Israel, and other Arab countries in Gaza. We're going to continue to follow this developing news and bring you all the latest updates just as soon as we get them into our newsroom, both on air and online at thenationaldesk.com. And coming up, President Biden at his final summit with foreign leaders speaking about Ukraine following a controversial decision, what he said, plus the warning Russia has issued as a result. Then Turkey Day travel, the record turnout expected and what people hitting the roads can be thankful for. And later, keeping American children safe at school, what new research reveals about what districts are short of that's having tragic consequences. President Joe Biden gave the opening remarks at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil today. This marks his final international summit with foreign leaders. And while there, Biden weighed in on global conflicts and the importance of pressuring Hamas into agreeing to a hostage deal while also maintaining his unwavering support for Ukraine.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. And by the way, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine led to the highest record food prices in all of history.
Over the weekend, President Biden authorized Ukraine to use U.S.-made longer-range missiles to strike inside Russia. This decision received a strong rebuke from Russia, with Russian lawmakers warning this could lead to a third world war. A Kremlin spokesperson says it adds fuel to the fire and tensions to the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin has not commented on the policy shift himself quite yet, but did say in September that such a move would be an act of war by the United States against Russia. Biden had held off on letting Ukraine use the weapons for that reason. And tonight we are looking at a growing trend in theft. Stolen cooking oil. It may sound quite bizarre, but it's a problem for the restaurant and biodiesel industries. And while the concept isn't new, the prevalence of it over the last year will shock you. The National News Desk's Angela Brown has a look at where it's happening and what may be driving the recent spike.
There's a lot of money to be made selling used cooking oil to recycling companies that turn the used oil into other products like biodiesel, for example. The crime has been happening for a while now, but officers say it's on the rise. Let's start in Nashville. Local media reporting a 3-year investigation by undercover agents revealed a crime syndicate of thieves from China stealing used cooking oil from restaurants across the Mid-South. Now to Georgia. WSB in Atlanta says 4 men were arrested after a 6-month investigation. Cartersville police say the men were connected to a criminal organization responsible for stealing bulk used cooking oil from several restaurants. And finally to Florida, where reports indicate that 2 South Florida men were arrested, accused of stealing 150 gallons of used cooking oil from 2 restaurants. Retired Sergeant Bessie Smith, spokesperson for the National Police Association.
Organized crime rings are stealing used cooking oil? What's up with that?
So this is such an extraordinary story. Used cooking oil, first of all, it fetches between 21 cents and 41 cents a pound. So it's incredibly valuable. And these thefts have been going on for about 15 years. But just in the last 10 months, nearly 3,000 used cooking oil thefts have occurred in at least 9 states out east and in the Midwest.
Many businesses store their used cooking oil outside their restaurant in a container and may plan to actually sell the oil themselves. The cooks just pull up outside and siphon off that oil into a container and then drive off.
Officers recommend restaurants move their used cooking oil containers inside if possible, or even beefing up security, for example, putting up floodlights outside to scare away crooks. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Angela, thank you. Next week, nearly 80 million Americans are predicted to travel more than 50 miles this upcoming Thanksgiving holiday weekend. That's about 2 million travelers more than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. But this doesn't necessarily mean it will be busier on the roads, because AAA is including the Monday and Tuesday after Thanksgiving into their forecast. That's good news. And as for how much you can expect to pay at the pump, prices steadily dropping. The national average price for a gallon of regular gas is $3.07 today. A week ago, it was a penny more at $3.08, and last month, the average was 12 cents higher at $3.19. Also, a year ago, the average gallon of gas was 25 cents higher at $3.32. So how about that? A bit of good news to sink into for the holiday season. Sitting too much, it can lead to heart problems as we age. A new study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology compared sedentary and active time with diagnoses of conditions like stroke, heart attack, and heart failure in later years. Using data from nearly 90,000 people wearing an accelerometer, showed sitting more than 10.5 hours a day led to a greater risk of cardiovascular disease. The study also showed a good workout at the end of the day did not undo the effects of sitting. And we have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in Ohio, where a principal is on leave over comments about the election.
Olentangy Orange High School principal Monica Asher covered in a political controversy following the release of this newsletter she sent to staffers at the high school, in it discussing the results of the presidential election, saying in parts, she's struggled this week to find the right words. I can't write a message that pretends like the election didn't happen, especially when so many of you are struggling with how to move forward. The commentary landing her in deep trouble with the district. The superintendent releasing a district-wide message to staff Thursday indicating Asher had been pulled from the building on administrative leave as the district investigates. Reaction to the news pouring in on social media. Some of those comments, good. Keep your politics out of your job. District administrators aren't speaking on camera about the investigation. However, we were sent a statement saying in part, they're committed to creating a welcoming environment.
I'd say a lot of people are mad. I'd say a lot of people are sad. It's not the intention of these victims' families to destroy LCDS. The idea is to bring change for the better for everyone in the LCDS community.
That's just one parent that shared with me on the common feelings that surrounds both parents and students of Lancaster Country Day School since word got out alleging AI-generated nude photos were being spread online. Since the original Safe to Say tip was anonymously shared to administration in November of 2023, there have been over 50 students now involved. The parent says Susquehanna Regional Police is investigating, speaking with each of the victims, going through hundreds of photos.
And, as a child, no one should have to do that. And I think as a parent, no one should have to do that. And it's devastating for the entire family that we're having to deal with this.
Called 911. No police response. Eventually, I was able to talk to an officer right before midnight, but the restaurant's closed.
That same night, two men kicked in the back door at Wild Mountain Cafe and started searching for valuables.
Went to the office, went through all the dewbacks and tips, took everything.
Owner Kevin Aylesworth says police did show up, but the investigation that followed fell short.
There were no fingerprints taken. It was a large sum of money, and there was no other investigation past that.
Seattle police say they were on scene within 8 minutes, but the suspects were already gone. Neighbors say they know that staffing shortages limit the police department's ability to respond, but something more needs to be done.
There's people that are calling 911 and they're not getting a response.
Mass shootings have come to define the American schooling experience. Coming up, what new research reveals about what's missing in schools that could help curb a grim reality. By some estimates, the U.S. has had more than 50 times as many school shootings as other major nations combined over the last 9 years. All of this leading to debates over how to keep children in schools safe. One solution has been to authorize school resource officers. But new investigative research shows there is a shortage of these officers, leading to gaps in safety across the country.
Yeah, that's right. Good morning.
School resource officer Micah Rose.
Good morning.
Greets students in class.
They're not just toys, right? They're tools.
And on the playground.
Whoa, wow.
They're kind of heavy.
He's now in his 7th year in this Washington State elementary school.
When kids feel safe in the school, their focus can be on learning.
Rose says building relationships like this can save lives, even with time stretched among thousands of students.
How many schools are you bouncing between?
So I have 8 schools total.
Yet staffing does not exist to fill every school that wants an SRO. States like Kentucky, Indiana, Minnesota, and Tennessee have struggled to fill the positions, and nearly a fifth of SROs are assigned to 5 or more schools like Micah.
Do you think it helps you also avoid emergencies or react to an emergency?
Absolutely. The value of having someone who has that knowledge and understanding of that school is a huge benefit in being able to respond if there is some type of emergency, an incident that does take place.
It is why 1,500 miles away in rural Arizona, drills like this are taking place. Spotlight on America was invited to watch active shooter training at a rural Arizona school to allow officers a chance to practice in a classroom setting where a familiar SRO isn't on standby.
What it comes down to is that there just aren't enough officers. We only have a little over 300 school resource officers for roughly 2,700 K-12 schools in the state of Arizona. So that's a bit of a math problem.
Mike Kurtenbach is the Arizona Department of Education School Safety Director.
So it puts chiefs and sheriffs in a very difficult situation. They see the value of school resource officers, establishing partnerships, relationships, and being there in the event that a bad thing happens. But there aren't enough officers to go around.
To police or not to police schools has been a delicate question nationwide. A 2023 analysis of public schools found while SROs reduce some forms of violence, they do not prevent gun-related incidents and may increase the numbers of suspensions and arrests. In the wake of the death of George Floyd and national protests involving police, cities like Oakland, Rochester, New York, and Seattle all ended their SRO programs.
So you think it makes a difference to have a school resource officer in place at schools across the state versus not?
Well, I think it's critically important to have an officer on campus.
In June, a 17-year-old student was shot and killed at Seattle's Garfield High School that had an SRO until the program was canceled in 2020.
When you look at what happened at Garfield, how do you react to the fact that there's not a school resource officer there?
Disappointment, really, because I know from personal experience that school resource officers are so often able to interrupt things long before they happen.
Have a good day.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Chris Daniels.
A gold watch gifted to the ship captain that rescued hundreds of Titanic passengers and crew has had quite a sale at auction. This 18-karat Tiffany pocket watch was given to Captain Arthur Rostron by three widows of wealthy businessmen who died when the Titanic sank back in 1912. Rostron diverted his passenger ship after hearing about distress calls from the Titanic and was able to save at least 700 people from the wreck. Turns out a hero's watch, which went up for bid at Henry Aldridge & Son auction house, can fetch a little more than expected. The winning bid was for just under $2 million, a record breaker for Titanic-related auction items. Pretty cool. And that does it for this edition of the National News Desk. Thank you so much for joining us.